Hello, I am Kevin Anderson,
And I'm Adam Okada.
and we are clinical educators and hosts of the Ask the Educator podcast, brought to you by HealthMark, a Getting a company.
Are you a sterile processing technician, infection preventionist, or biomedical engineer? No matter your role, if you're involved in medical device processing, this podcast is for you. Our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and tools for excellence in medical device processing.
Now let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ask the Educator podcast. My name is Adam Okada. Our host, Kevin Anderson, can't be with us today, but I'm excited because we have Tiffany Dailey, who is one of our traveling leaders in sterile processing, here with us. Tiffany, welcome to the show, and just tell us a little about who you are and your background.
Thank you, Adam, for having me on the show. My name is Tiffany Dailey. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been in the peri-op services for over 24 years. I've had various roles within this peri-op service, including surgical tech, endoscopy tech, sales rep, educator, and interim management.
Awesome. You know, it's really unique actually being a traveling leader because it's a little bit different than being a, full-time position, because you're usually brought into maybe not the best situations where they really need somebody to take over the reins quickly and start making changes quickly. So tell us a little about the unique challenges of being a leader that travels in the sterile processing environment.
So one of the unique challenges that I see as I'm, traveling across the world is when you're a permanent manager and you're sitting in your department and you kind of reflect on like, oh, I should be doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And then you go to these different departments all across the world and you see how behind we are in our industry in sterile processing. And so it's very shocking, but it gives me that motivation to try to make the place better or make a difference wherever I go.
Yeah, and that's really what we want to do, because I've had that similar situation where I came into a department. They had a manager that was there, I don't know, about 30 years, but he was an OR person and he never really was experienced in sterile processing and standards and guidelines. So they had been doing the same thing for 30 years and hadn't changed it. And when I came in there, I was shocked at seeing processes from 30 years ago. But I assume that it's a little bit different, like the struggles as somebody who's coming in temporarily. Is it harder to like gain trust and try to figure out like where do you start and all those things as a traveler?
Absolutely. One of the biggest struggles I see is the departments that I end up at is they have a high turnover on their leadership team. I mean, as a leader, the struggles of you're pulled in so many different directions, you're spread thin across, the department, and you just kind of can't do everything that you want to do. And I just feel like, it's very hard being a manager. You get burned out and so you leave. And that has that domino effect on the staff as well, because they see that high turnover, and then to trust somebody, especially as an interim, you're just going to leave anyways. I don't have to listen to you kind of mindset. So it is kind of very hard to get that trust, but it's one of those challenges that I do like to try to take on.
That's really admirable, because there are so many departments that need that help immediately. And to try to make that difference where you're coming into, admittedly, a much more difficult situation than somebody who's coming into a full-time spot where you can actually build over time. You can take on one small thing and take it piece by piece, whereas a traveling manager really doesn't have that luxury. And that kind of brings me to one of my other points is one of the first things we did at this facility that was struggling is we created this set of standard work instructions. How does standard work instructions, as a traveling person, especially somebody who's not going to be there for very long, how can that help set up the department for future success?
I mean, it builds the foundation, and it actually does help build that trust with the staff, because one of the things that I do see is like the staff, they're going tit for tat against each other. Like, well, this person's not doing this or that person's not doing this, so I'm not doing it. And when you build that standard work, when everybody's doing the same thing across the board, you have more effectiveness in your department. And then they have that foundation. That's one of the things that I do like to use to build the trust with the staff is whenever I'm trying to put something in place, I don't just tell them, this isn't Tiffany's opinion. I'm going to tell you how we're going to run this department by the standards and by the IFU. And when they hear that, they really want to gain the same knowledge that we have as leaders to give them. So that's really how I do build the trust with the staff, because it's when you have so many different opinions going and it's never the right way to do something, it doesn't go over very well with them.
No, absolutely not. And it's a lot of the we've always done it this way kind of mindset. If they're used to doing something in a certain way, and all sterile processing techs tell me the same thing, they always say, well, we never had any infections, so what's the problem? And I always tell them, like, you don't have any infections that you know of, but there are hundreds of thousands of surgical site infections every year. I'm guessing this department has been responsible for one or more of those. And you're right. That is a great place to start, is to tell them, this isn't me coming in and implementing rules upon you. Here's what our standards say. Here's what the IFUs for our devices here say. And then creating that, like you said, the standard work that you can give them, that later they can come back to that. And that department can build on that foundation of doing things the right way according to our standards, guidelines, and IFU. So I think it's a great thing that you're doing. Traveling leadership is not easy. I have never had enough confidence to want to take that on, because I'm somebody that I like to take those little chunks, but to come into a situation and to try to really move a step forward, even though you're only there temporarily, I really have a lot of respect for. So any final thoughts before we leave for this podcast, for the listeners? Any final thoughts that you have?
Well, one thing that I do want to make a point across, like when you start getting the staff more involved and you start talking to them about IFUs and standards, you are empowering them to have that voice that when you do step away, they have that power to say, no, we're not doing this. Because everybody sees sterile processing as we can sterilize anything, and they don't understand the background. No, we need an IFU to actually say that it's sterile. And you give the staff that voice to say, no, we're not doing that because there's no IFU, or just because we've done it for 30 years doesn't mean that it's right. So that is one of the things that I do recommend for the leaders, is to have their staff more involved, getting them to have that voice, getting them to look up standards, look up IFUs, so they can, be your backup, because you're not successful if your team's not empowered as well.
Tiffany, thank you so much for being on the podcast, for being a traveling leader, and for all the travelers out there. Thank you so much for what you do. I know it's kind of the unsung heroes that come in and pinch hit and get the job done. So thank you to everybody who's out there as a traveling professional. We'll have Kevin Anderson back on the next episode. So we'll see you next time on the Ask the Educator podcast.
Thank you, Adam.
All opinions expressed on this episode are those of the presenters. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
Before using any medical device, it's important to review the manufacturer's instructions for use and consult with a professional.
For any questions or feedback, please reach out to us at asktheeducator@hmark.com.